Can you hear me? Is my mic on? Yeah? Can you hear me? Yeah. You have two handicapped people here today because I hurt my leg as well, so I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm late. My daughter, who was in the car with me, we had to take her to the hospital near her because she had an allergic reaction to something, so I apologize for being late. I'm very, very sorry. Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. I thought we'd start right off with questions, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So it's not often that four siblings are all in the entertainment business. How did you find this while you were growing up, and how do you find it today?
What's my opinion of my brothers' careers? No, I think that my brothers and I got into the business at a different time. Because next year I'm going to be 60, and my brothers are all in their 50s. And so for people who got into this in the 80s, it was a very different time. The 70s and the 80s, the late 70s and the 80s. And my brothers and I got into it when it was the end of an old way of 3 TV networks in America and 5 movie studios that controlled all the business. And independent film was very much of a fringe enterprise, and there was a group of mostly men and some women who controlled the fate of the entertainment business. And if you could convince them that it was in their interest to hire you, then you could work and continue to work. It was a very small, kind of incestuous world. I remember when I worked, Christopher Guest, the great Christopher Guest, who did all those wonderful films, Waiting for Guffman and so forth. Chris Guest's mother was the head of casting at CBS TV in the 80s when I was out there looking for work in the mid-80s, and she was this lovely woman, this unbelievably elegant woman, and she was, she liked me. I couldn't quite understand why, but she liked me, and she would always bring me in, and there was a sense of, we're going to keep trying to find something that you fit into, and there was a much more aggressive passion in casting. Now, I think that those things have been replaced by people who are very risk averse, and casting is a very, very torturous process for people in the movie business. They're always going, well, how do we get the most bang for the buck in terms of our movie and how much money we have? And it was a lot more relaxed, I think, when I started, and easier to break into. And now the business, if you're starting now, I think it's slightly, or not so slightly, more difficult. And my brothers, I got a job, and I truly believe, I've said this many times, that my brothers thought, well, if Bozo here can work in Hollywood, what's to stop us from going there? And they just followed suit, and they worked for quite a while.
So you just mentioned the kind of changes in the evolving industry. What would be your advice to aspiring actors out in the audience today?
Well, I think that it would depend on their their level of self-awareness, maybe, which is difficult to pull off when you're very young, maybe, but their level of self-awareness about what kind of work do they want to do. Knowing that anything that they want to do is fine, it's worthy. If you want to be a big movie star, it's a path that you take to head in that direction. If you want to work and do great plays and theater and drama and the classics and so forth, and Shakespeare and Molière, there's a whole network of places to do that. It isn't very remunerative. You're not going to make a lot of money, and you may be performing in very small venues. But I have a handful of friends of mine from the beginning of my career, who continue to live that way. They come to New York, they have a home in New York maybe, or LA. They do TV to kind of punch a clock and get their pension and welfare and their medical benefits from the union. Then they go off to the Guthrie, and they go off to La Jolla, and they go off to Louisville Rep, and anywhere across the United States, in repertory theater and summer stock theater and regional theater, and perform. That's their stomping ground, if you will. I've got a few friends my age and older who that's where they live. And if you say to people, do you want to act and just try to do the best work with the best people, there's one path you take. And if you want to try to grab the big brass ring and become famous and successful on another level, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I don't judge that. And it's just tougher. It's very competitive. And I think sometimes people think they want one and they realize they want the other, you know. I think sometimes people think that they want to become big stars and they want to have very fizzy careers in show business, and they realize that sometimes that means you're not going to get to do very much acting. You know, I spend more time on the road marketing the movie than I do making the movie, you know. We shoot a movie now in the independent world for 4 or 5 weeks. You may shoot 20, 25. 25 days now seems to be the magic number in micro-budget films. I'm here shooting a film now, I'm doing Mission Impossible, and the budget on my last movie was very small. The budget on my last movie was the budget for ice on Mission Impossible. For people's drinks, you know, during the day. It was the budget for Altoids on Mission Impossible. Mission Impossible spends a couple $1 million on mints for people to have during the day. And you know, that seems to be the way the world is now. There's the $2.5 million movie, and there's the $205 million movie. And I try to get people to understand, just be honest with yourself what you think you want. You know, do you want to, it's a tough thing when you're young, because one seems very seductive, and you want to tell yourself when you're young that you have an opportunity to do both. You want to try. But I know many, many people who try that and they don't succeed, and they've robbed themselves of a great opportunity to perform and to act in another sense, and they regret that. So maybe some balance of the two. That's a very, very difficult thing to pull off as well, but a balance of those two.
Okay, so kind of sticking with the theme of kind of roles and different kinds of acting, what's been your favorite role, both in terms of character and then in terms of also the behind-the-scenes element of the filming?
I think Boss Baby is my greatest movie. Boss Baby is the greatest movie I've ever made. It's my Citizen Kane, I think, truly. But no, I mean, I think every movie, there's no such thing as a favorite, but I think every film, there's an opportunity to find, very few films I've done have no opportunity to have some positive experience, you know. I mean, and plays that I've done. And, you know, I would see Meryl Streep out on Long Island where I live, because she's related to a family I know that has a home out there. They're my neighbors in East Hampton, Long Island, and I would see her from time to time. And I always thought I would be doing a movie with her where we were like on horses on the heath, and it would be some British drama or what have you. We'd all be saying, "Oh my Lord," and this and thus. And I do the movie It's Complicated with her, which is not at all what I thought I would be doing, but it was a great experience to be with her and to work with her. You know, the director said, she said, "I'm going to pair you with somebody," and I'm going to pair you with her, and she's 9 years older than I am. And the director said, "The men do it all the time. They pair the men with a woman who's not age appropriate for them." They said, "Why shouldn't women have the opportunity to do that?" And I said, none of that really matters, because in the movie, my character is, I mean, there's somewhat about an attraction. I said, but more importantly, the man is supposed to still be in love with his ex-wife. He finds out the hard way that he's still in love with his ex-wife. And I said, and when that character is played by Meryl, that's not a hard thing to do. Meryl is very easy to fall in love with, you know, when you're around her. She's an amazing person. So things like that. I mean, the cast is an aspect of it, the material is an aspect of it, the cinematography is an aspect of it. I worked with, on It's Complicated, John Toll was the cinematographer, who's the only person, I think he's one of two maybe, to have won the Oscar back-to-back, and he won the Oscar for Braveheart and Legends of the Fall back-to-back. And Toll was a great cinematographer, and cinematographers often contribute to your performance in a way that's just priceless, you know. And I work with some of the greatest cinema. That's really probably the greatest thing I've had in my life, is I got to work with the greatest cinematographers in the business, Caleb Deschanel and Ballhaus and Tak Fujimoto and all the legends of the last 40 years, and Bob Richardson, and on, you know. And everything you do, you know, there's an opportunity there in some way to, the research you do on a film is very often a tremendous opportunity. You know, there's always been there's there's always been a way in which motion picture studios and networks have an access to things that you just could never, probably at the highest level other than maybe the White House, you know, where you have to do research for a film, and the next thing you know, when I did Hunt for Red October, we went on a nuclear-class submarine and dove off the coast of San Diego and went overnight. We dove to 600 feet and went overnight on the SS Salt Lake City, and we dove down and spent the night there. And it was like one of the most amazing experiences of my life. I watched 100 hours of surgery to prepare for another movie, and I wasn't in an observation booth. I was gloved and gowned and right in the field of the surgery, watching septuple bypasses and gunshot victims and learning all about how people behave in an operating room in terms of their, because when you do a movie, you look for what's called the authorization of the character. Do people really behave that way? People will write things down and you'll go, well, do they really do that? And when I went into the operating room, sure enough, the guy gets in there. He's this, 40-year-old guy who's doing the bypass operation, and he cranks up like Van Halen. He playing like this hard rock is like pounding in the operating room, and they do whatever they have to do to kind of get through the fact that this is really like carpentry to them, And I'm sitting there. I mean, I can't even believe what I'm seeing. They take the guy's heart out of his body and put it on top of his body, and they're sewing it and doing all this stuff while he's hooked up to a machine. And in the background here, I'm like, this is the most surreal thing I've ever seen in my life, But it's true, it's true. You go to authorize that reality and see what it's really like. And that's a thrilling part of the business, is the research that you do and what you learn, the books they give you to read, the people that you talk to. And then I guess last but not least is the directors and the co-stars. I've worked with actors who are amazing, and I've worked with some directors who are pretty amazing too.
So if you could have played any role in a film that's been made throughout the history of Hollywood, which one would it have been?
In a film that's already been made, to remake a film, or come up with another film?
To remake a film.
To remake a film? Wow, that's a tough question. Wow. Because you guess sometimes movies are of their time. And so I think that's impossible to say, really, because movies really are of their time, and classic films live on, but they, I think that it's almost impossible. That's an amazing question, really, because I can't think of who I would want to, if I love the film, why would I want to replace the actor in the film? You know what I mean? But I can think of actors I wish I had worked with. I dream of that. People always say to me, who do you want to work with? And they, of course, mean who's contemporary. They say, who do you want to make a movie with? I've got a script, who do you want to work with? And I say, well, I want to work with Clark Gable. That's who I want to work with. I want to work with Joan Crawford, And the people that are your peers, I've got a short list of those that I really would love to, Daniel Day-Lewis, and quite a few of them, actually. But I think, God, it would be great to have worked with like Humphrey Bogart, I can't imagine what that would be like to go on a movie set and it's Humphrey Bogart, So, but in terms of replacing someone in a film, I don't think that I could imagine what I would do,
Fair enough.
Yeah, that's a hard question.
Yeah, because I guess if it's your favorite film, then you don't want to replace a character in it.
The other thing about it is you see movies that are the greatest movies, and very often the greatest movies are a lot of work. Lawrence of Arabia is a great movie, and I think, God, I'd love to be, when Peter O'Toole was cast in Lawrence of Arabia, it launched his film career. He was a young actor. If I remember correctly from his memoir, he'd done all the theater in London and around the country, and done some TV, and he gets shot out of a cannon to play this coveted role, but they worked him to death for like a year. Lean, who's one of my favorite directors, and I watch his films regularly. Like last night, I was watching Bridge on the River Kwai for a little while, just to remind myself of what makes Lean, because he's so singular. He really put people through it. He was really a great taskmaster, and long shooting. And 2001: A Space Odyssey. I interviewed those guys once for this television show I did, and Gary Lockwood and Keir Dullea talked about how, they kind of didn't really understand in some degree what they were doing. Like Kubrick would just be like, just stand over there and stare up there, and it was all like what the whole metaphysics of the movie was toward the end. they weren't quite sure they got it, you know. But they know it took a long time. It took a long time to shoot that movie. So I know that I've done movies that have very long schedules, relatively speaking, and some movies they just shoot them very, very quickly. But you know, in the end, it all starts with writing. It all starts with an idea. And I encourage everybody who's involved in the business to really take the dramatic literature courses, especially at a, you know, estimable school like this, and read everything. Read everything you can. Read everything you can. Philosophy and literature and drama and Shakespeare and Shaw and everything. Read everything you can. And to have a reference in your mind for what works and what might not work, because the good script, and there are good scripts out there, the good script that's the muscular script, the smart script is the goal. That's the goal. That's the white whale that everybody's looking for.
So it's kind of staying on the topic of literature, you also write a column for the Huffington Post and you've written books also. What was it that prompted you to express yourself through this form of media?
Well, I think I've always been, I went to school for political science at George Washington University, then I left to finish at NYU in drama, and when I was at GW, I worked in the Congress at an internship. Everybody that goes down there does these internships in the White House or whatever department you wind up getting lucky enough to land an internship in. They're kind of down there for that. And I did that back in the 70s, and I remember that, you know, politics was really, I studied the presidency and American government and economics, and I really thought I was going to go to law school and do all of that. And the passion for that didn't leave me, in spite of the fact that you're probably better off leaving your political opinions aside if you want to succeed in the entertainment business. The most successful people in the entertainment business are often people who keep those opinions to themselves. The biggest movie stars in the world, you tend not to know that much about their opinions politically and so forth, which is probably another piece of advice I'd give people to if you want to make it in the business. But at the same time, I saw changes in my country since Vietnam and when Reagan came in, and I feel that the United States has become a place that sweeps things under the rug. The American political leadership sweeps things under the rug and encourages the American people to sweep things under the rug. And now the problem for America is in our living room, there's a gigantic lump under the rug that everybody can see. We've swept so much stuff under there, it's appalling. And to confront who we are and what we've done and where we went off the rails and where America was a great world leader and where America has faltered since 1975 is something that's kind of haunted me and most other people who are progressives in the United States. So I have expressed my opinion about a lot of those things, and certainly that comes with a cost, I think.
Mm. So now we've touched on politics. You've previously been known for saying that you might be interested in running for political office yourself.
Well, then I got married again. Now I have 3 children, and my wife's having another child. In April, I'm going to be 60. And you know what my wife has given me for my 60th birthday? Another baby. We're having our 4th baby in 5 years. And so the idea of moving to Washington and taking my family down there and running for office, my wife has said, you know, no way. So, I mean, listen, I would love to be the president of the United States. I think I would be a good president of the United States. I think I care about people, and I care about all people and want everybody to be happy, and especially becoming a father again at my age, where I think I have more of a perspective. I have a tremendous amount of empathy for people who are middle-class people in America who are trying really hard to just provide for their family. When America is a place which is still this big hissing engine economically, but more and more people are just struggling to meet their obligations, to pay their rents and mortgages and put their kids through school and their medical care and things. And I just think as a dad, I've been very lucky. I've made a good living and I can give my family what they need. And I think to myself how much pain I would be in. I mean, how much extraordinary pain. A unique kind of pain. If as a man who views himself in that kind of gender, now tedious gender way, that need to provide for my family, and I couldn't. I can't think of any worse kind of suffering than to want to give to your kids and your family, and you couldn't. And I thought I wanted to be president of the United States to help people do that, to help construct a society that made that easier for people just to live, you know, and to get where they needed to go. And that was in everybody's interest. It was in my interest that you got where you wanted to go. It was my interest that you were healthy. It was my interest that you had health care. It was in my interest that all of us had what we needed as part of an economy. Because in America and in the UK, the friction between democracy and capitalism is a constant. And in America, you know, you can guess which one of those is winning now. Democracy versus capitalism. In America, it's like the Constitution and the democratic values of the country are like antiques that they're throwing in a fireplace to keep us warm. You know, it's like we're taking furniture and artwork and burning it in our house in order to keep the heat on, and squandering this legacy we have of our values and sense of equality in order to make sure corporations still make money. And but at the same time, I feel like in America that Trump, number one, my wife doesn't really want that from my family, that level of scrutiny. And number two, I think that Trump is probably going to be the death knell of the non-traditional candidate. We will lurch back in 2020 to people who are typically executives of state houses as opposed to legislators in Washington, governors. You know, I think the top ticket people will be governors of states. There could be some senators or congressmen, but I highly doubt that. It will be leaders of the political parties who have executive experience in government, whether it's Andrew Cuomo or whether it's Phil Murphy, who got elected in New Jersey, or whoever. Or a woman, I'm trying to think of the woman, it'll come to me, but but of course, what is her name, who, my mind is going, who Trump is always taking on because she claims she was American Indian. Elizabeth Warren, yeah, I'm very jet lagged, but Elizabeth Warren, who knows who those candidates will be. Kristen Gillibrand, I'm a New Yorker, and people are very, very fond of Gillibrand and fond of her positions on things. But I think that these candidates coming in like Trump with no legislative experience, with no legislative record, as far as we can tell, Trump has no record of anything, paying his taxes, I think that Trump has not paved the way for that kind of candidacy. In my opinion, there's a very good chance that he's killed that kind of candidacy, and everything will swerve back toward Washington insiders. You know.
Here's to hoping.
Yeah.
So you're also a passionate animal rights activist. What was it that inspired this passion?
Well, to be honest with you, when I met my first wife, she was a vegetarian. And we went on our first date, and we were ordering the food. And she said, could I see your vegetarian menu? And she said, I'm a vegetarian. And I was beginning to have these very strong feelings for my wife, so I did what most men I think would do. I said, oh my God, so am I. Oh my God. You're a vegetarian? I said, my God, so could I see the vegetarian menu as well, please? And I kind of lied to get closer to my then wife, and indeed became a vegetarian in 1992. I gave up beef and poultry, and I was a pescatarian. I ate fish every now and then. But through my relationship with my ex-wife, I was introduced to Alex Pacheco and Ingrid Newkirk, who were the then founders of PETA, and their great success for PETA, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, was the famous Silver Springs monkeys case, where they liberated the laboratory animals in Silver Spring, Maryland. And then Pacheco then left. They founded the organization together. Pacheco then left and was replaced by Dan Matthews, who's her right hand. And I've been involved with them in terms of beef and pork and poultry production in the US, exposing the shortcuts that are done there. And I've also been most involved with animals in performance, the banning of animals in circuses, rodeos, and zoos. I work with another organization called the Performing Animal Welfare Society that was then in Galt, California, in the rural area outside of Sacramento. They since have bought a massive tract of land in San Andreas, named after the famous fault line. They're in San Andreas in Northern California. They have a couple thousand acres there they have as a refuge for retired animals. And the woman who passed away, Pat Derby was her name, She's the one who turned me on to the horrors and the tragedy of animals in performance and in circuses and hidden video. And her husband was this like real good-looking. I mean, he's like a male model. This guy Ed Stewart, very good-looking, kind of cowboy-looking guy, and he would take hidden cameras and go to facilities in India where there were these outposts where they would train circus animals in India. And the guides that would bring him there, because they were rather remote, and he would fly there, and they were doing this under contract for some American vendors who would buy these animals, and they'd go there, and the guy would drop them on the neighboring town, and say, "Whatever you do, don't let them find the camera, because they'll kill you if they find the camera. They'll kill you." And Ed would go in and risk his life to go and videotape the beating and the torture of these elephants in India, and in other places in the world as well. It's not specific to India. And I just got very taken with that. I got very overwhelmed by that. The way that animals were treated in the circus. And Ringling Brothers went out of business in the United States. That was something that was unimaginable in the year 2000. And the New York Times, which I'm a reader of the New York Times and a fan of the New York Times, but they wound up doing a very romanticized portrait of the last day of the circus. You can go online and see the photography of the last day of Ringling Brothers and all the people there who sadly are losing their jobs. It is sad, like in coal. You want to say to all the people, I can't wait to put you all out of a job, not because I want to put you out of a job, but we need to get off this fossil fuel, but I want to do anything we can to help you get retrained and do another job. We don't want anybody to be jobless in this economy. But they did this thing for Ringling Brothers, which was these very, very beautiful, actually, photographs of the ringmaster saying goodbye to everybody for the first time with his top hat and everything, and people saying goodbye to each other who'd been on the road together for years and years for the circus. But they were exposed as being abusive, or some of their handlers were being abusive toward these animals. And in the United States, which I think the United States, other than California, the United States are pretty much behind everybody and everything that's morally right. They ended it, and Ringling Brothers went out of business. And the next thing to do in the United States, as far as I'm concerned, is to get people to understand that we need more vigorous enforcement of biofuel from processing plants where they have pigs. Because like in North Carolina, you've got a horrific amount of animal waste product from these facilities, which have hundreds of thousands of pigs excreting all day long into local waters and causing all kinds of damage and things like that. And there's scientists who say they can make it all into a fuel and use it as an energy source. And so that's another thing we want to do, because the cost of eating meat, the cost to the environment of raising meat and preparing meat and slaughtering meat and delivering meat to market in the United States has become very, very, it's like gasoline. When you sit down and you eat a hamburger somewhere, the hamburger costs you X, but what's not factored into that price is all the things that the environmental organizations and states and federal government have to do to clean up the mess made in order to get the meat to your plate. And we're trying to have a much more honest discussion about that subject in the United States now as well. Notice how you ask a question. I can just keep going. So cut me off whenever you want to cut me off.
So one last question.
Hit me with your crutch.
They've taken it away, I think. So one last question from me before we go to some audience questions, if that's okay. So you mentioned that you're currently filming the next Mission Impossible movie, but what do you have planned next?
Well, I'm supposed to go to Atlanta to do a film for a few weeks, which is a kind of a police drama that's set in the United States not too far in the future. It's like 30 years in the future. And the relationship between the community of color and the police in the drama is 10 times worse than it is now. Police are just cutting corners left and right in order to manage what they view as a kind of economic impoverished class and people who are living in poverty, and they're pretty much just shooting people on the streets if there's any, if they have a problem. And I play a cop who's training. There was a bit of a training day type of component to it, but I'm trying to train him not to be like them and to try to maintain his integrity and not cut the corners that these people cut. And we're going to shoot that, and then I'm going to. I got a couple things I'm supposed to do, but mostly what I like to do now is work as little as possible because of my kids. I mean, I'm here now for 8 or 9 days, and I couldn't bring my family, which I usually do. But now it's like such a huge. I mean, now when I travel with my family, that's the circus in my life now. You know, it's my wife and the women that help us with our kids, and so I would like to work a little bit less so I can be home with my kids. I hope my wife wins the lottery and makes a lot of money, man. I mean, I hope she gets rich so I can stop working completely.
Fingers crossed for you.
Fingers crossed.
So let's move on to some audience questions then, if that's okay. If you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand. We'll hopefully get through as many of you as possible. Shall we go to the member on the right there? Just there. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, and thanks for coming here to give this talk. I have a more general question. I can imagine being an actor, people recognize you everywhere, being such a famous actor specifically. Have you ever had any moments in your life where you wished you weren't famous, a certain scenario?
Well, I mean, I think that, I mean, you kind of reach a threshold where people know you if you have success in film or TV, and that's a good thing, and you have to live with that. And when people approach you and say things to you or are kind to you, that's a plus, that's desirable. And the problem is if when things go wrong, if people disapprove of you, I mean, you know, Kevin Spacey. You know, Kevin Spacey was no one enjoyed being famous more than Kevin. Kevin really worked hard, and you know, Kevin is an enormously talented guy. Now I'm willing to bet Kevin wishes he weren't famous and that no one would recognize him again, because wherever he goes now, if people see him, there's going to be some other reaction, and that's the double-edged sword of that. Is in the age of social media. When I first started in this business, there was no social media. And people's expressions of what they thought about you, those were handled by professional, you know, and again, I'm not saying I endorse this or I prefer this, those were handled by professional media types. There were gossip columnists who occupied a very remote corner of the business. I can name names of people who were like old style gossip columnists and TV personalities who really were like a fringe. I mean, now they're the mainstream. Now TMZ and things like that are this big industry. But when I first started, they really occupied a very, very little corner of the media world. And now, with the internet and social media, and especially with this Me Too and Time's Up and all these other kinds of hashtags it's like a brush fire. You know, you literally wake up one day and you're gone. You've been torched completely. It's like a fire, and your career is like a building that just burns down to the ground. And of course, many of the people, I'm assuming most of them, the large percentage of them deserve what's happened to them. And but it's just amazing now how you've given a voice to the public, this direct voice, where there was polling before. Now the internet is the poll that you manage and you own. And it's an extraordinary time. It's really incredible, you know. I never imagined we would be where we are now, where all these men, and again, I want to stress, the ones who you know they're guilty of the things that they said, they got what's coming to them. But it's kind of mesmerizing to watch how quickly it happens. It's like, you know, John so-and-so, poof, he's gone. People with huge careers, gone, gone, gone. And it's fame now is something you have to handle like it's an explosive. You know what I mean? You want to make sure it doesn't get on you and blow you up. You know, your fame can kill you if you're not careful. So.
Thank you. Should we go to the member just over here?
Hi, thank you for coming today. A lighter question. Have you ever applied...
There's a light right above your head. And you look beatific right now. You look like an angel from heaven.
Thank you.
So ask me an angelic question. What question would an angel ask me?
I'll
Please.
do my best.
No pressure.
You've come down here from heaven to ask me what? You should see this. It's like,
I have come to ask you, did you ever or have you ever applied the principles of Six Sigma to your acting?
God, if I did, I didn't do it intentionally, but I was, listen, I made a lot of movies, and then when the movies you make, it becomes kind of clear that they're not making money. You make a movie, and if it makes money, you get 3 more shots at the arcade, and you go and go and go in the studio film system. And I'm here working with Tom, and Tom is the last movie star. Everybody else is kind of their realities are a little altered now in terms of what they're paid and how they live, and then there's a lot of more pressure than there was. Whereas Tom Cruise, who I'm working with now, Tom is one of the last people who they give him $200 million to make a movie, and when Tom comes back, they're done. They make $600 million or $800 million. These movies he makes are still popular around the world, and you do those movies, and if you don't have that kind of career, then you go to independent film, where there's less risk. And then if you want to, you do TV. And I did the show 30 Rock, and it was weird for me to make films and think that that's what I wanted, and that was more covetous to do that. And in truth, 30 Rock was the best job I've ever had in my life. And when that ended, I was devastated, because you go to work, and they were they were nuts. Those people were completely nuts. Tina and all the writers were crazy. And I go to work, and they'd give you the script for the next week's show, and we would do a reading in a conference room. And the cast was all on a dais, and in front of us was all the crafts people and all the crew of the show, the department heads, to understand what their task was in that script in terms of sets and costumes and so forth. And then kind of down an aisle, there was a camera, like what you have here almost, but in a much smaller space, that would shoot us on a camera and send us to LA, because we were in New York, to beam the reading to LA to get their notes on the script. And we did a reading of the script every Wednesday for the following week's show. And they'd hand me the script, and Robert Carlock, who was the head writer with Tina, would say, okay, now don't worry about this. I know it's going to sound crazy. I said the same thing every week. I know it's going to sound crazy, but we're going to do the Patty Duke thing, where everybody here remember who Patty Duke was, where we're going to do the doppelganger thing, where you're going to act against yourself. You're going to play both parts in the scene. And you're going to play a gay Mexican soap opera star. And I used to go, are you out of your mind? And sure enough, we'd read it, and we'd go shoot it. And it was like the funniest thing I've ever done in my life. For me, I thought it was funny. And I missed that job terribly. That job was the best job. And everybody who worked there, all the crew, we still run into each other and keep in touch with each other. Everybody says the same thing: we'll never have a job that was as great as that job. That was the best job I ever had. I missed them.
Thank you. Should we go to the hand over there?
I wanted to ask you about your foray into political satire. What impact, if any, do you think your portrayal of Donald Trump had on Donald Trump, and also on the wider electorate in the US?
Well, I think that we occupy one corner of a media response. I don't want to say assault, but a media response to Trump. You've got evening shows, comedy shows, talk shows, Trevor Noah, John Oliver, the network hosts who do these programs, Samantha Bee, and all of them have their response to Trump, which is unavoidable. It's unavoidable. The President of the United States should have a sort of je ne sais quoi that maybe we'll give you 90 days or 100 days to fine-tune that. You can be Bush Jr., and a lot of people assume you stole the election, and your political supporters and your political operatives stole the election. But a few months go by, and people are going to settle into the fact that we've got to live with this, and he's going to begin to exhibit that ineffable quality that the President of the United States ought to have. There's policies, and there's a way that you present yourself in this role, which is people used to arguably say he was the most powerful person in the world, and but it's a person who you certainly have an expectation of about how they're going to talk and what kind of language they're going to use. And all right-wingers get pulled to the center and all left-wingers get pulled to the center. So there's a space that the president tends to occupy, especially after 2 terms, where there's a maturation that happens there that's unavoidable. Here we have a person who is the same as they were during the debates before the election, hasn't changed one molecule the entire time. And all of us were hoping there would be some change. When this person wins who you are, I don't think anybody provoked more horror and more disappointment and more disgust when they won. The next day, when you walked around New York City, and I was in New York the day after the election, it was like 9/11. There was a pall over the city that was so profound, and everybody was so depressed, because they knew Trump. They knew Trump that was this marginal figure. Trump was not a reality show host who for a dozen or more years had convinced the rest of what we call flyover America that he was this crack ace executive that he is on this TV show. Trump was an odd kind of very, in New York, making a lot of money still means something. So people nodded to him in that world of wealthy New Yorkers. They tipped their hat to him very politely. But he was never somebody who was an honored member of our community. Or Trump was nobody in New York. He was nobody. He lived in a tower, no pun intended, all alone, and was very much of a drive-by presence on the social scene of New York. He would come to an event. The wife is in a gown. She's a lovely woman, by the way. He's in his tux. Red carpet photos gone. He was never a table mate with you in an event. Never, never. And his whole life was private. He was not a public figure at all. And so when he won, people in New York were horrified. They were horrified. And yet, they thought, we have to face this and live this down. And a few months go by, and if he had exhibited, because I always think of the world of alternatives, if someone had just dialed this a little bit to the right, not significantly, but just a little bit, if we have a little bit of change, Trump could have avoided so much of, Trump could have avoided the great share of what he's burdened with now by just modifying his behavior ever so slightly in his language. But he refused to do that. He refuses. He believes that he's there to be this kind of bomb-throwing presence to just shake up everything, and things that people would never imagine the president saying or doing. He's like, why not? Let's say something, shake things up a little bit. Let's say racist things. Let's say crazy things, and just see what. And it's really, really, the response was just necessary. Now, for me to do the Trump thing, that's something. When Lorne Michaels called me and said, I want you to play Trump, I said, there's no way I'm going to play Trump. There is no way I'm going to do that. I'm going to go make a movie in the fall. The director of the movie was a friend of mine, and I've said this story before. The producers of the film failed to escrow money for me. And when you work for the studios or the networks, they may torment you in a negotiation about how much money is in your paycheck. But when you make the deal, the checks don't bounce. The money, they have lines of credit of billions of dollars. There's never a problem with getting paid. Not true in the independent world, in which now we have agreements where you escrow some fraction of my money before we start rolling the camera, and that's just pro forma. And when they didn't do this, we gave them another few days, and we gave them another week, and they didn't do it. And I called my friend and I said, I don't know what to tell you, but I'm not doing the movie. And I called Lorne and I said, and Lorne's my dear friend, I love Lorne. And I said, I'm Trump, here I come. And I went into a room and we just did the old acting trick where you watch the program with the sound off. They always said, watch the acting with the sound off and see what they don't think about the voice and worry about the voice. What does he do? And with Trump, it was just this, every time I saw him, it was left eyebrow up, right eyebrow down, stick your mouth out like you're trying to suck a golf ball through a garden hose. And every time I turned, he was like, and I'm going, wow, this is so, and I turn to look at people, I go, and I would do it to people, I go like this, and they go, I said, is that what you see? They're like, yeah, that's it. Eyebrow up, eyebrow down, mouth out. And we just would watch this for like 3 or 4 days. And that's what we went with when they rolled the camera. The first day I did it, there's a guy, Chris Kelly. There's 2 Chris Kellys at SNL, by the way, but there's one of them is the stage manager who takes you by the hand. He holds your hand and you walk around the dark stage to go to the position so the live audience doesn't see you. That you walk around the perimeter so the seated studio audience doesn't see you, to go to your mark to enter for the cold opening. And it's Chris's escorting me to go, I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't have it. I kind of have this goofy, listen to me, everybody, And I'm going, I don't know what I'm going to do, And we went and did it. And the other Chris Kelly was the writer, Chris and Sarah Schneider. And people were just ready. We're helping to channel their frustration and their panic, But I do believe it's ebbing, obviously. People had a year of that. And now there's a Trump fatigue in America now. I mean, more and more people who thought Pence, get rid of Trump and that Pence would be no net gain, they're beginning to say more and more, we'll take Pence. Pence is one of them, he'll deal. He's a Washington guy, he'll deal. And he'll come more to a place of a negotiation. And, I think that Trump is, what's sad is it just didn't have to be that way. It just seems so unnecessary. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the purple jumper over there.
Hi. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us. I actually have a question on some recent comments you made. So amidst this Me Too the whole Me Too movement in Hollywood right now, there have been several allegations against Woody Allen for sexual misconduct. And you very recently came out strongly in defense of Woody Allen, saying that from your perspective and from the times that you've worked with him, it's been nothing but a pleasure and something along the lines of that. I'm just curious as to what moved you to make that speech and to come out in support of Woody Allen and effectively against all these other women who are making these allegations. And if you could just elaborate on that a bit.
Well, to correct your comment is there aren't a lot of other women making those allegations. They're supporting the one person who's making the allegation.
But there is one woman out there making these allegations.
No, but I'm aware of that. I'm just trying to correct your comment where you said many women are making allegations. Many women are supporting the one woman who's making the allegation. Only one is making those allegations. And in my mind, because this is a conversation which could go on, and I kind of anticipated we would have this question, but I thought to myself that in order to say that Dylan Farrow is lying, or in order to say that Dylan Farrow is telling the truth, you have to say that her brother is lying. Her brother, who had the same purview into the family, he was there, he's a member of their family. Moses Farrow says that none of that happened, that it's a lie. So I don't feel comfortable saying which one is a liar. Number two, and again, this is an opinion. There's no facts here. And another opinion is that there was a judge involved in the case who had the opportunity. This is the person I blame the most for everybody's troubles. Because there was a judge, this guy Marco, who was in charge, who did a really dastardly and ugly thing. He did a horrible thing. And that is, he said, I think there might be charges to bring up against Allen, and therefore spattered him with that paint. He said, but I'm not going to put the child through this because she's only 7 years old. In the interest of the child, we won't go through with the case, even though I think she may have a point here. And I think to myself, so Allen's chance to clear his name, you robbed him of that. That judge is to blame for everything where we are now in terms of finding the truth. He's not to blame for who assaulted the girl or who didn't assault the girl, who lied. The truth of the matter is one thing, but the chance to arrive at the truth, or the best chance to arrive at the truth was derailed by a judge who did a horrible, horrible, horrible thing. Now, Pharaoh's adoptive son, Moses Farrow, says, my sister is completely lying, pressured by her mother, and I wrote a book about less so about my divorce than a critique of the California family law system, which exists inside this same matrix in which divorce is a war, and divorce is an ugly war, and in a state like California, because the states in the United States are very different, and in a state like California, I said, the judges in the courtroom are like pit bosses in Las Vegas casinos. And they want you to stay at the table and keep playing. They never want you to leave. They want the litigants to keep going and spending money. They're there to help promote the divorce industry. And they never want people to settle, and they never want things to end. And I'm not going to belabor that, but I'm saying I know from firsthand for interviewing people from my book that on both sides, men and women, there's so much lying that goes on. There's so much distortion of the facts, and employing the children, shamefully so, to achieve your goals, to kill your opponent in this litigation. That we can't assume that if that's true in this case, that's something that never takes place. It takes place all the time. There are litigants on both sides who lie to quote unquote dirty up the other litigant before you go into any kind of settlement. Now listen, I mean, I'm the first person to say, and I wrote this in my book, and I wrote this in my book years ago. And I didn't write it to establish my cred as I was sensitive to women's rights issues. But what I said was that all men who were part of what had been called the father's rights movement that then morphed into the parents' rights movement, because many women were being victimized by this as well. More and more men were willing to spend the money to challenge their ex-wives for custody, for significant custody of the child. Traditionally, 40, 50 years ago, men were like, you're going to live with your mother, I'm going to go make a living, and I'm going to come visit you. And then more and more men were like, well, my wife is working, and she goes to work, so what does it matter whose nanny the kid stays with? Is your nanny better because it's your nanny? And more men started to fight women to get cut and do terrible things. The terrible things that women had done to men started to do to women in courts, blah, 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 blah. But in that book I wrote, I said, all men who want shared custody of their children loathe and detest on the highest level men who neglect their children, their health and safety, men who beat women, abuse women, neglect women, men who do these things. The average man in this room, I'm willing to tell you, he does not have some malicious DNA toward women. You know, a dear friends of mine, I was talking to him on the phone when all this was going down, and I said, my God, I'm too vain. This sexual assault thing is so odd to me because I thought, when I used to go on a date with a woman, if I thought she wasn't wildly in love with me within 15 minutes, we're out of here. You know, we're not even gonna have dessert. You know, I thought, I mean, I wasn't gonna, the idea of a woman, tears streaming down her face, and you're gonna make her do something that she doesn't wanna do. Who the hell does that? I think that's rare. I think that our society, as a judge said in my book, that if men were predatory in that way on a wholesale level, our society would cease to function. Men who do those things are rare. They're more than we want, and they're out there, and they need to be punished. But I can't say that I'm certain that she's telling the truth. And the thing is, Alan was robbed of the chance to clear his name. There was a chance in 1992, they were going to go to trial. They were going to go to court. They lived in New York and Connecticut. And Alan was put through forensic child custody evaluations in both states. And both states refused to prosecute them. But then that judge in Connecticut turned around and said, I could have prosecuted him, there was enough there. And I thought to myself, then shame on you. Because in the arc of these gender-specific problems we have in our society, like in America, now in America, if you're a woman, and you can read about this in my book, or other books that are better books actually, that someone, a woman would call and report spousal abuse. And the cops would come and the woman would change her mind once she, quote unquote, calmed down, because she doesn't want the breadwinner in the traditional family to go to jail. Now in the United States, when the phone call is made to report spousal abuse, someone gets handcuffed and taken away automatically. No one gets to, the woman doesn't get to go, well, I changed my mind. That doesn't happen in the United States anymore. You don't get to change your mind. You drop the dime on somebody for spousal abuse, the husband gets arrested and goes to jail. And then they have a trial. And the point is that when people do these things, yes, I mean, I understand. I'm not a woman, so I don't understand it the way a woman does. But I understand the fear and all the pressures that are put on them not to report, not to carry through. But I do hope we find a way to make it easier for them to carry through, because it's the only way this is going to stop. Is the people that do this, they must be punished. They must be punished. They must go to trial. I'm doing a talk show right now for ABC in New York, and one of the pilot packages that we did was with a woman named Kim Worthy, who's the head of the county prosecutor's office for the county in Michigan that encompasses Detroit. And she's the woman who works with Mariska Hargitay from the show SVU and Mariska's foundation, Joyful Heart Foundation. She's the woman that found the rape kit backlog in a garage there. 1,100 rape kits that have been processed with women. that they didn't even spend the money on, because they said, oh, we don't have the money for it. The utilized, exercised rape kit for 1,100 women. And they cracked open those rape kits, and they started to process those rape kits, and they convicted 300 people. They found 300 rapists and put them on trial and arrested them and put them away. Some of them in other states, who, according to the statistics, would have gone on and raped other people. Would have raped even, because most men who commit that crime are serial rapists, most. She explained to me. Kim Worthy, you should look her up on the internet, Kim Worthy. And my point is that most healthy men, most normal men know, we want to see those men that do those things, we want to see them punished. If I felt Woody Allen had really, really done that, and it's a tragedy that that woman is asserting that's what happened, someone's lying. And that's painful to consider. But at the same time, those people who are convicted and who did do this thing, we have to make sure that they get punished. We have to make sure that our society is provided with the resources, rape kits. There's a huge rape kit backlog in the United States, in all 50 states. And we have to make sure that that is taken more seriously. I thought I would have thunderous applause after I finished this. No.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question.
Yes.
Should we go to the hand right at the back in the corner there, on the other side, there, over there?
I was initially going to ask you what your response to Alex Jones's offer to bare knuckle box when you impersonated him on SNL, but I do want to ask you about something you did speak about earlier. You expect that in 2020 that the pendulum will swing back with regards to conventional governor capital candidates in American politics. But I wanted to ask, with the recent speech by Oprah Winfrey and endorsement from those in your industry like Meryl Streep, what is your view on the left now turning to unexperienced candidates as a counter to Donald Trump?
Well, I think that people would like to have a person that they think is, I mean, I can only speak for myself. I can only give my own interpretation. That Oprah Winfrey is construed as someone that has, to whatever degree, the same resources as Trump, but would employ them in the way that they hoped he would. You'd arrive in Washington loaded with money, a billionaire. Oprah Winfrey's a billionaire. Oprah Winfrey is the wealthiest woman in the entertainment business, I believe. And you thought that she would come to, they would want her to come, and we'd have kind of a redo. Let's bring the billionaire in here who's going to get it right now, as opposed to the billionaire who's going to use the government as a machine to line the pockets of his friends, which of course Trump is very guilty of, very guilty of. And nonetheless, whether she has what it takes to be the president, man or woman, they have what it takes to be the president in the modern world, in the world we live in now, where the United States' ability to occupy the role that it occupies is in danger. The United States is getting pretty close to ceding the position as the #1 power and the #1 economic power to the Chinese. And Americans are in tremendous debt. Americans are like a bunch of drunken millionaires who have run out of money. They just decided to put everything on their American Express card. And that bill is going to come due. And the more in debt we are, the more we're getting closer to a basket currency. And the US dollar will not be the dollar, will not be the standard by which all of the currencies are measured. You'll have a basket currency that includes the Deutschmark and the yuan and you name it. And the dollar will be one, the British pound, no doubt. And a person who's going to come and construct a realistic assessment of where the country is now. Things are still great, but we need to make some changes and some reforms about how we spent money. Sometimes the United States has gotten it right less than I'd like in terms of military action. And the rest of the time, the United States is like a drunk in a bar who's picking a fight with everybody every night. It's another fight every night. And the United States is getting, a little long in the tooth for that. Where's the policy where the United States is going to fit into an equation world globally where we are the good neighbor and we're the good partner with people? The days of the United States' own form of colonial exploitation, which this country basically invented, this country and the Dutch, the American form of colonialization and that kind of exploitation, those days are over, and these other countries want to be treated fairly. And the more fairly we treat them, the less advantageous it is for us economically. And so who's going to present the American people with the truth? To present them with the truth. The United States is a place where you go and you buy a gallon of gasoline, and a gallon of gasoline is half in the United States what the national average is in the Western world over here in Europe and in the UK. If it's $8 or $10 or even $12 here by that measure, it's $3.50 or $4 in the US, but it's not really that. It's about $400 a gallon in the US because of all the military activity we have to engage in to secure that oil. Or all the cleanup we have to do of the fracking in the United States because we've decided to frack for oil and pump for oil in the US now. The United States now was I think in Bloomberg the other day, is number 2 behind the Soviet Union, or to the former Soviet Union, behind the Russians in terms of oil production. And it's coming at great cost, earthquakes and this and that in the United States. So the person who can help Americans see the big picture, And the Americans have to tighten their belts, and the Americans have to go on a little bit of not an austerity budget, they need to get things a little leaner. Americans have to work harder. I will say one thing to you, I mean, I am an American in my soul, and I go there, and Americans are, I mean, there's a lot of people who don't get it, and there's a lot of people who would like to work and can't, but Americans are very hardworking people. They wake up at the crack of dawn, and they stay at work until 7 or 8 o'clock at night, like a lot of other places. But Americans on the whole are very hardworking. You give an American a job where he can advance his career and he can make a decent amount of money, they're going to give you their soul. They're going to give you their soul. And they hand over their taxes to an American government, and the amount of taxes we pay is not the problem. I pay a lot of taxes. If I told you how much taxes I paid last night, you'd probably pass out on this floor right here. How much I paid last year. I mean, I pay a lot of money. I'm in the 50% bracket. It's a lot of dough. I don't mind. It's what we spend it on that bothers me. It's how it's wasted. Giving Exxon subsidies. What the fuck does Exxon need need a subsidy for? But in America, it's all this grease for industry, business, sugar industry, ethanol, the corn industry, all this other stuff. And just to name a few, which are relatively minor, the defense industry. And I think the person, whether it's Oprah or whoever, everyone's thinking that only an independent-minded person, someone who's not beholden to a political party. Republicans come into office in the United States, and this is a very glib and very reductive thing to say, and a very, very kind of glib thing to say. But Republicans basically come into office, and they're going to cut the taxes of the wealthiest class in exchange for their contributions. If you're the Koch brothers, or not even in that realm, the Mercers or the Kochs, you're somebody who's on the list, quote unquote. And when I'm done, I'm going to save your family and your trusts and your corporate tax, your whole tax picture. I'm going to save you $20 million next year. You're going to give me 3 or 4 of that, aren't you? That's the deal, the unspoken deal. The Republicans give money and tax breaks to their political supporters, and those people then kick back the vig to them to keep the Republicans in power. It's a machine that's been operating that way like a Swiss watch since the post-war period. And the Democrats do the opposite. They give the money in social programs to their needy constituencies in exchange for their vote. They're buying people's votes that way. And it's assumed that Oprah Winfrey or someone like that would come in and open the doors and have this breath of fresh air. We would not have politics beholden to anyone. That's never going to happen. That's never going to happen. You're going to have somebody come in who can make some progress, but not perfection. You're never going to have perfection as far as that goes, but you'd like to have, so for example, I don't want to beat this to death, but like in the United States, the biggest villains in the United States right now are not Trump. Trump is this blithe idiot who's sitting in a room watching TV all day and eating cheese sandwiches and tweeting on his phone. And the people that are kind of tiptoeing around the White House doing everything nefarious, DeVos is the great villain in America right now. She's going to destroy the whole educational system of the United States of America. She's a monster. She's a monster, this woman. She is a monster. And Pruitt is a sociopath. He's the head of the EPA, and he's going to just blow up all the regulations that we've killed ourselves for. I will tell you that when I lived in Los Angeles and was looking for jobs then, in the 1980s, you could drive, if you know LA at all, you could drive over the Santa Monica Mountains through the Sepulveda Pass into the northern part of LA, into the valley, and there was a layer of air that looked like mustard gas for about 3 or 4 months out of the year. The air pollution was so bad. And California took it upon themselves, and they are the pioneer globally, other than maybe Norway. They took it upon themselves to adjust emissions controls there. And then a couple decades went by, and now it's completely changed. They have their days. There are times of the year that there's a lot of cars on the road there, and the population there has doubled since then. But there were people who wouldn't even live in the eastern parts of Los Angeles. You know, Silver Lake, Los Feliz, Pasadena, San Marino, all of downtown LA. Nobody lived in downtown LA. Nobody. It was covered in gas. It was covered in smog. Covered. And now it's all gone. And what has it done to the economy? People have moved in there. They built apartment buildings. People now, young people with money and who were young and kind of hip and looking for some place to live, used to live on the West Side. Now nobody lives on the West Side. Only people my age live on the West Side. And young people all live east in town where there's maybe a little bit of a more reasonable price. That's because of the environmental path that the state of California got on. And now Pruitt, who's a complete nutbag, this guy is nuts. He's nuts. He wants to undo all that on the federal level. So, you know, the reason we want to get rid of Trump is because of the people that Trump has brought with him. The people that Trump has brought with him. And, you know, I just pray to God that the midterms give us an even better, even sharper view that the country is turning toward something more reasonable. Because I mean, I'm somebody who I become slightly more conservative as I get older. You know, I mean, I'm not in any radical way. I don't want to have, you know, socialism in some irresponsible way in my country. I realize it's competitive. I don't want to punish people. One thing I don't want to do is punish people for success. In the United States, there's a lot of people like that. They're like, let's punish the people who are successful. Being rich is bad. I'm like, no, it's not. You know, but I mean, I don't want to punish people for success. This is America. Success, that's the wheel we spin. Everybody knew with that when we got involved, you know what I mean? But the point is that there's a certain common sense. There's a certain common sense about how to treat air and water and the way we process our food and how do we keep people safe and our children and global warming. Jesus, I went to Paris. A week after the attack, I was asked by the UN to host the Equator Prize, where we gave out 33 awards to people for stewardship of the rainforest around the world. Even in Afghanistan, there's a sliver of forest, and we gave this organization awards for that. Belize, of course, most of it in South America and the Amazon. And we gave 33 of these awards. I was supposed to be one of 5 presenters, and all 4 of the others backed out because of the attack at the club in Paris. And I thought to myself, well, shit, this is the best time to go of all, is right after the attack in terms of safety. And I went, and sure enough, there were French troops with rifles on every corner. And we were all very, very safe. And I went and I hosted the whole thing myself. And I was there, the sense you had, I went from conference to conference. It was really kind of it was a very intoxicating vibe there. It was really fantastic to feel you were in this global community. I know these are all cliches, but you're in this global community where you thought these people all knew, this is it, this is our last hope. We're all gonna get together and say, let's do this. Incrementally, let's try to make this better. And the United States says, forget it. And they wanna walk out. The United States says, I mean, how many people back home are just appalled by that? That's why we've got to get rid of this guy. He's got to go. He's gonna get us all killed, you know, and he's gonna ruin the planet, you know, so. Can we have one more light kind of show business question? Yes, you, sir. You, ma'am, because it was a man last time. You, please. Is it a light show business question?
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Well, I actually just wanted to say I'm a huge 30 Rock fan, and I wanted to know if you have any plans for maybe working with Tina Fey again sometime in the future.
Well, Tina Fey right now is doing, she's working rigorously on taking her movie Mean Girls to Broadway as a Broadway musical. And Mean Girls she's been doing it in Washington, they've been previewing, and she's bringing Mean Girls to Broadway very soon, like in April. So that's what Tina's doing. She's a bit busy with that. So maybe I can be in Mean Girls, the musical movie, is what I'm thinking.
Okay. Would you sing a song?
Oh, we'll figure that out. Anyway, thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you.